Good morning, students. Welcome back. Happy Tuesday. If you're watching this video, it is most likely because you are at home right now, so I hope that you're taking care of yourself and staying healthy, and we look forward to having you back at school. So, in this video, you are going to find the following. Number one, I'm going to go over today's agenda and give you specific directions for how to complete an activity called the Principles of the Constitution. I'm also going to go through instruction as if you were in the classroom. This is very similar to exactly what I'm going to be doing in the classroom, so please make sure you listen. In that lecture, in that direct instruction, I'm going to provide you an example and an answer to a part of the activity, so please make sure that you are listening thoroughly. And then finally, after you're done watching the video, you have time to work on the activity. You do not need to submit the activity today. Instead, you're going to submit the activity tomorrow. All right, so let's get started. First things first, it's been a while since we've talked about social studies stuff, but today we are going to be diving into something called the Principles of the Constitution. So let's back up and talk about the Constitution, right? So, as we remember from before break when you all rocked your Constitution test, the Constitution starts with something called the preamble. It starts with "We the people," followed by Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. Remember, the U.S. Constitution is organized into a preamble, but it actually has 7 articles. We covered the 3 major ones that take up about 80% to 90% of the actual Constitution. The next sections we're going to dive into in just a moment. But just to review, the first 3 articles really are the meat and potatoes of the Constitution. They create the structure for the U.S. government. They divide the government into 3 branches, each with a different function, and these articles assign each branch its own set of powers. For example, the legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch executes laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. They also give each branch a little bit of control over the other branches, that concept of checks and balances and separation of powers. So there's other sort of ideas and principles at play, and all of this is very illustrative or sort of gives us an idea of what the founders valued and what they didn't value. Now, the next section. Article 4, which we will be diving into in the next few weeks, Article 4 is all about the states' rights. It lists out the things that the states can do. But it also basically was a rule book for the states after the AOC, because just to remember how much the states were at odds with each other. They acted like little independent countries that often feuded with each other and lacked the sort of central government to support the overall nation, and they very much acted as independent states. So it was supposed to sort of fix that. Article 5, then, speaking of fixing, is about amending the Constitution. An amendment to the Constitution, and there are 27 of them, is a change to the Constitution or an addition to the Constitution. This is something the founders wanted to put into the Constitution because they recognized that the document was imperfect and over time would need to change as the world changes. The next section, Article 6, actually reflects a lot of the ideas of Article 4. It's also about the states. It's as if sort of the founders had to go back to this section in order to make it super clear. They want to make one thing clear. Even though the states do have certain powers, certain enumerated powers, the federal government and this Constitution is supreme. And that's the word they used. The Supremacy Clause is what it is called. And that's really the bulk of Article 6. And then finally, Article 7, the last section of the Constitution. This explains how it's going to be ratified or approved. It's one sentence. It basically says that as soon as 9 states approve or ratify the Constitution, the American experiment of democracy would begin. And that's exactly what happened. They made it 9 out of the 13 original states, as opposed to under the AOC, it was 13 out of 13. Now, we will be getting to these 4 articles over the next 2 weeks. However, we will not be learning about them with the traditional lecture, notes, quiz kind of structure that we had been learning about previously. Instead, we're going to really dive into the concepts and the principles of these articles in order to apply them to the real world today. We're going to sort of take it a step further. Specifically, tomorrow, as well as Thursday and Friday, we're going to be focusing on Article 4, as well as a little bit of Article 6. They kind of go together. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is take a step back. The principles of the Constitution. We haven't talked about this in a while, and over break, I'm sure some of you guys forgot some of these really valuable nuggets of information. So let's review. What did the founders actually value? There are 6 main principles found in the Constitution. They're often called the founding principles. On your assignment posted in Schoology in today's folder, there's an assignment titled The Principles of the Constitution. I want you to pause this video, go and pull up that assignment so that you have it ready to go. All right, so at this point, you should have the assignment set up, a split screen with the assignment on one side and the video on the other. Now, the principles of the Constitution. The first principle of the Constitution that I want you to fill in on your notes is something called popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty. Fill it in where the first column is on your notes. The second one is titled Consent of the Governed. Consent of the Governed. Again, right now we're just getting the information down, so just jot it down. The next principle is federalism. Federalism. The next one is separation of powers. The next is checks and balances. And the last one is individual rights. Now, if you were with me in class right now, we would turn and talk about which of these are familiar to us and which of these are not. And the ones that we have learned about, because obviously you're alone right now, and I hope that it's running through your mind, but the ones that we have learned about are checks and balances, separation of powers, and consent of the governed. We also, during the Enlightenment specifically, talked about things like individual rights. And while we did talk about it in a sense, it's called popular sovereignty. So there are a lot of things up here that we talked about. But there are some that are very new to us. The one main one is federalism. That's the one we're really going to unpack over the next few days. It has a lot to do with the states. Now, for this assignment, we're going to look at examples and descriptions of each of these, specifically why the founders valued it and how they wove it into the Constitution. Why are we doing this? Number one, it's going to help us review key concepts found in the Constitution. It's been a while, so we need to review in order to build on that knowledge and keep sort of going where we left off. And then number two, we need to identify and describe examples of each of these founding principles from the Constitution. So we're going to take it a step further and actually make the connection between these big ideas and the things we learned about the Constitution so far. So your directions are to read each of the following statements below, and I'm reading this off of your sheet, describing the 6 guiding principles for the Constitution. For each, answer the questions below. Be sure to utilize the statements as well as your previous knowledge to answer those questions. So don't just rely on the reading, but please go back to your notes, for example, or look back at some of our activities and discussions around the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. All right, so let's do one together. The first one is popular sovereignty. I'm going to read it first. What is it? Every nation's government has something called sovereignty, which is absolute power within its own borders. Sovereignty is a fancy word for power. Answering to no higher authority. For much of history, most of the world's governments were based on a system of nobility in which power was based on social class and passed down through families. It was heredity, right? It was hereditary whether or not you had power. America's founders wanted to flip that on its head. They believed in something called popular sovereignty. So instead of getting power from your family or your class or how much money you have, the principle is that a government's power is derived from the people. Popular sovereignty may be the most fundamental idea behind the U.S. Constitution. You see it in the very first line, quote, "We the people." You also see it in Articles 1, 2, and 3, which create a government whose officials are either elected by the people or chosen by representatives who were elected by the people. So this concept is something that we actually have already talked about, which is that people give our representatives power, not their money or their class or their family. Now, the first question below that we need to answer is, why did the founders include this in the Constitution? The description's right up here in the first paragraph. you might want to pause the video here. Popular sovereignty was included in the Constitution because previous governments, especially during the 1600s and 1700s in Europe, distributed power based on social class and heredity. And the founders wanted to change that. The reading says they wanted to flip it on its head, right? And they wanted power to come from the people. So that's why they included this idea. And then the second question is, what are some examples of popular sovereignty from the U.S. Constitution? There's a bunch, but the first is the quote, "We the people." The second is all over Articles 1, 2, and 3, and it has to do with elected officials. This idea that the people actually give the representatives their job, give them their sovereignty. That includes the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the office of the President. So now that you have one under your belt, you're going to jump into the next few here. I'm going to skip over a few slides. Now it's your turn. You do. Your task is to unpack the remaining principles of the Constitution for each section. Be sure to do the following. Number 1, please read the description of the principle. It may also be helpful to annotate. Number 2, answer question number 1. Why did the founders include blank in the Constitution? Number 3, discuss. Can you think of any examples from our classroom discussion of the Constitution that sound like that concept that you just read, right? And then the last question is, what are some examples of blank from the U.S. Constitution? So do those 3 steps. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. You do not need to submit today. I'm going to go way back to the beginning. Do not submit the actual activity. You're going to finish it tomorrow after you check your answers. All right. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to give me an email. See you guys soon, hopefully.